Welcome, everyone. You are here for the third part in this series around increasing apprenticeship alignment. And this is brought to you by the Center of Excellence regarding strategic partnerships and system alignment. So this time around, we actually get to have Doug Keast from NDI once again presenting for us. And he's bringing along a friend of his, Lou Adams, which I will let that introduction happen during this webinar. This is our finals on this series. If you didn't get a chance to watch the first two, you can go back to the YouTube channel for NAWDP and grab them, or you can go to our COE website and also grab those past events and those webinars. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm Doug Keast, project manager with the National Disability Institute. And I was with you during the first two sessions in this three-part series on apprenticeship driver alignment. It's wonderful to see those of you who've been with us the past couple of months, and welcome others joining us for the first time for this session also. At this point, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague who's been a leader in developing this assessment approach, Lou Adams. Lou, would you like to share a little bit about your background in this work with our audience?
Sure, Doug, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Lou Adams. I'm the former Bureau Administrator for the State of Michigan's General Vocational Rehabilitation Agency and the Department of Labor and Economic Growth. I'm a past colleague of Doug, as he just mentioned, at the National Disability Institute, and I'm currently the president of the National Rehab Association's Board of Directors, and an instructor and mentor for the Center for Transformational Rehabilitation Leadership at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. My most recent apprenticeship work has been with the VA's Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Services and in assisting local workforce partners, as Doug has indicated, in aligning resources to support apprenticeships. It's good to be here.
Thank you, Lou. Excuse me. In a follow-up to our initial discussion in August on the guidance and review of state plans and examples with regard to apprenticeship alignment, and then our discussion last month related to assessing driver alignment, our objectives for today's presentation focus on the importance of consensus in defining alignment in your collaboration, your determination of whether or not increased alignment will be beneficial to apprenticeship expansion, using the assessment information effectively in improving alignment if you decide to move forward in that direction, and finally, tools and resources that are available to your leadership team in increasing alignment. As a quick recap of the first two sessions, there are a couple of key factors making this discussion important. For those of you operating as a part of your workforce system under the WIOA vision for customer service, it is good to recognize that the federal programs overseeing the operations of the 6 core programs are on the same page with this vision. On August 13, 2015, the Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration, the Department of Education's Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, and Education's Rehabilitation Service Administration stated in separate guidance letters to the field, under WIOA, partner programs and entities that are jointly responsible for workforce and economic development, educational, and other human resource programs collaborate to create a seamless, customer-focused, one-stop delivery system that integrates service delivery across all programs and enhances access to the program's services. Guidance to the field from these 3 federal offices all refer to alignment and integration of services as important to customer impact, but they leave the operational definition of these things up to the leadership of workforce systems. As we considered the guidance to the field from labor last August, it is clear that alignment for the workforce system includes apprenticeship strategies and expertise in service to businesses and to job seekers. But we learned in our review of the unified and combined state plans that there are key drivers for apprenticeship activity that broaden our ideas of alignment beyond those core and required programs that make their services available through the American Job Centers. These programs together make up only one of the four main drivers for apprenticeship. These drivers include the first, the business, which includes businesses, business sectors, intermediaries, entities that represent the business needs for skills and talent. Secondly, education providers, those entities that provide that related instruction that complement the work experience provided in apprenticeship activities. Thirdly, the state workforce system, including those programs identified as core and required partners in WIOA. And finally, the Federal Apprenticeship Program or State Apprenticeship Office, depending on how the state is set up for approving and supporting apprenticeship programs, and the Apprenticeship Advisory Council in states where there is a state apprenticeship office. And depending upon the focus of your apprenticeship strategy and the service culture that is unique to your state, there may be additional stakeholders whose leadership is just as important as these drivers to effective strategies and their sustainability. So to wrap up the recap, last month we reviewed a process in which leadership teams are able to define integration together, along with the level of leadership each driver provides. To take us into the realm of what this means to us with effective apprenticeship strategy implementation, I'm going to kick this back to you, Lou.
Okay, well, thank you, Doug. What does being a part of leadership mean? What does being at the leadership table mean? Well, in any kind of effort that you're undertaking, it's important to have a compelling why. Why are you doing this? And that's essential when it comes to aligning for apprenticeship. The Great Resignation shows no sign of abating. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a record 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs by the end of 2021, and virtually all employment sectors face workforce shortages. However, the number of apprenticeships registered with the Department of Labor has surpassed 636,000, a 64% increase from a decade ago. It's essential to partner up to address the challenges and take advantages of the opportunities. Many organizations lack the internal expertise or resources to attract non-traditional talent, such as people with disabilities, dislocated workers, caregivers returning to the workforce, veterans, and community college graduates. And I might say, as a member of a board of a local intermediate school district, those graduating with career technical education degree, high school degrees as well, and certificates. Forging meaningful partnerships with groups that are already connected to hidden workers pays dividends in overcoming these hurdles. Partner ecosystems identified in the state plan, and especially the drivers Doug has identified, can create the resources necessary to design apprenticeship programs that meet employers' needs through robust collaboration. Then, tailored recruitment strategies can be developed and executed to attract hidden talent within the local communities these partner organizations serve. So that's the compelling why. First, who? Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great, found that those organizations that outperform others have placed a priority on getting the right people involved from the very start. Or as Collins says, getting the right people on the bus. As Doug has laid out for you previously, the right people on the bus are those who represent the four drivers at a minimum. The right people represent benefits for their driver and go beyond that for mutual benefit for all partners, and ultimately the business and the apprentice. Then the what? So for the compelling why, the right people, and then what are you going to do? It's necessary to understand the current status quo, the system in place, or how things are currently done. For one thing, it's probably hardwired, and it's not likely to change on its own or improve on its own. An assessment of how things are now done with input from the frontline people and classifying it on the continuum, on the steps that Doug has showed, can serve as a launching point to consensus on the way forward. And finally, the how. How are we going to do it? Peter Block, an innovative thinker, consultant, and author, has a book entitled The Answer to How is Yes. In it, he makes the point that although there are many models, there's no one right answer, no template, no recipe to follow for any specific endeavor. It's through commitment, collaboration, and looking out not for self-interest, but for the larger good to be reached. Next slide, Doug. Assessment and follow-up. Is there leadership of all four drivers? Are the key stakeholders included in leadership? Is there a need to expand representation in leadership? Is there consensus in leadership on the desired outcomes? And is there inclusion, the right kind of inclusion in leadership? Alignment involves a combination of strategies to simplify access to services and supports with the goal of providing the best possible apprenticeship system. It's in the implementation of a distinctive mix of partner agencies, drivers and levers, strategies and processes based on the resources available, the needs of the apprentice and the business intermediaries, the education training providers, the apprenticeship office advisory boards, and the workforce system. The reasons for aligning, the common advantages are enhancing enhancing apprenticeship outcomes, promoting more effective services to business, maximizing scarce resources, boosting apprenticeship as a viable option for job seekers and for businesses, and improving performance accountability. Now, this work calls for the right mix of leaders that is inclusive of those who have the most to gain and the most to contribute. It's also good to ask at each stage, who else should be in the room? Leaders are needed who can envision the change necessary, those who have the technical expertise necessary and the understanding of the different needs and processes of their partners. It's not about titles, it's about understanding. Understanding the diversity of experience and expertise and a willingness to collaborate. The end user, in this case, business and apprentices, are a device group with their own unique characteristics, and a corresponding diversity of membership and leadership for the apprenticeship system is also needed. At the end, the four drivers should be able to determine if there is a consensus in leadership on where they are now and where they'd like to go. Next slide, Doug. When looking at where we are now and where we want to be, the quality of the alignment determination is important. It's helpful to have a facilitator engaged in this process, and we have worksheets and handouts to aid in this work. It starts with a conversation. What does each entity, each partner, each leader see as benefits to their own driver system and job seekers in aligning apprenticeship services? The assessment is made as a system altogether, everybody together in a room doing an assessment of what the current state is. Therefore, consensus on the assessment is really important because each representative brings a different perspective. It will often take a discussion and deliberation to arrive at this consensus. Leaving the process with different drivers having a different assessment of alignment will be problematic in achieving the systems change your initiative is working towards. So what are the steps? Identify the entities, the organizations, the businesses, the training centers that represent activity within for each one of the drivers. List the steps that might include actions like targeting the apprenticeship, the job seeker or business, recruitment, referrals, assessment, readiness, and match for apprenticeships, necessary training needed, compliance factors, apprenticeships themselves, and the follow-up. So what's the flow of the process for each one of the drivers in the system? And seeing what those key factors and key indicators are and identifying those is part of the first step. If you can't identify what they are, you can't see where there's opportunities for connection and for alignment going forward. For each step, each of the drivers, the leadership team notes whether they have a leverage or a lead role. In some cases, they might be a lead, in others, they may be leveraging resources. They come to a current consensus on the current level of alignment for each of the activities on that continuum from isolation, communication, coordination, collaboration, and integration. And at the end of the process, key areas in need of greater alignment are identified, and the leadership team establishes its desired level of alignment. So they might be at communication right now, and that's a good thing, but if they change something around and work a little more closely together, they might be at coordination or collaboration, and choosing where they want to be and the goal they set for themselves is part of that next step in defining the level they'd like to achieve on each one of those key areas, and then creating a work plan to get there, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It will result in an action plan or a strategic plan for those efforts. Okay, Doug, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Importance of skin in the game. Skin in the game means having a personal investment in the pursuit of a goal or an achievement. Skin in the game reduces the effects of divergence between action and cheap talk. It's easy as a leader to sit in a room and have this really exotic plan with lots of flow charts and PowerPoint presentations and those kinds of things. But if there's not the real commitment to actually seeing it through, if it's just to leave other people to do the work, then it's probably not going to be successful. Skin in the game, when you have an outcome you want to reach and you want to reach together, also keeps egos in check. Things designed by people without skin in the game tend to grow in complication. I'm sure you've seen this before, where those who are designing something, whether you talk to a mechanic about an engineer and how they design the cars, they make it really difficult for them, make it very complicated. And the same kind of thing can happen in human service systems and employment and training systems, where things become so complicated that they're burdensome to the people that are actually carrying it out. That tends to happen when people aren't understanding that they're part of the solution and not just part of the planning. And of course, always do more than you talk, and proceed talk with action. For it will always remain that action without talk supersedes talk without action. So it's better to act and talk about it later sometimes than it is to have all this talking and nothing gets done. So having skin in the game affects all of those. And Peter Block, who I mentioned earlier, writes, "The shift we seek needs to be embodied in each meeting we attend. For at the operational practical level, all the thinking about policy, strategy, mission, and milestones gets down to this. What are we going to do when we get together? What are we going to do when we put it into effect? If our being together in the spirit of collaboration or alignment, that is a significant gain in most cases than being in isolation and communication. A large payoff from stubborn courage is not limited to the military. It takes stubborn courage sometimes to see these things through. But as Margaret Mead says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has." And Doug, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Lou. The greatest challenge for all of us in workforce systems with WIOA implementation is in creating a system response in a single voice to a customer, whether it's a job seeker or a business, given the diverse programs, funding streams, and accountabilities that make it up. Many have questioned the relevance of this in the WIOA vision, but it is a focus for customer service, with the experience of the customer in mind, that is often lost in implementation by many in leadership as we start considering our collective impact. This insight is important as we discuss alignment for the 4 key drivers in apprenticeship. As Lou mentioned, a first step in the assessment is in identifying if all key drivers have a leadership role in your apprenticeship expansion activity. A follow-up to that question might be how well that representation for a driver reflects the leadership potential of all of its elements. While we have identified 4 specific drivers, there are many components or potential components of that driver that may not be very aligned with each other, suggesting a potential focus needed for internal alignment. The most likely driver to have a single representative effectively providing leadership is the apprenticeship office. This will include a representative from the Federal Office of Apprenticeship in those states where they approve and support the registered apprenticeship programs, or a representative from the State Apprenticeship Agency and or the Apprenticeship Advisory Board for those states that have established state approving agencies. But then looking at the other three drivers, this is where it can be a bit more complicated. The focus of a specific apprenticeship initiative may determine the best leadership representation for the business and education drivers. But as an initiative becomes larger in scope and establishes momentum, it is best to reassess representation periodically. Sustainability of changes made often require increasing the leadership representation in the larger picture in order to increase the internal alignment of a specific driver. As you note here, the business driver for an initiative may include the businesses that employ apprentices or have the potential to employ them, economic development groups, business associations, and especially intermediaries. It may be that a single entity can effectively assume a leadership role in an apprenticeship initiative for it to be successful, but that is a determination that your team makes. The same consideration goes for education providers. There's a wide range of education institutions operating in every state who assume diverse roles in supporting the growth of talent in the talent pipeline. Consideration for internal alignment with regard to an apprenticeship initiative in the education driver might be a practice in determining which components are active and which aren't in supporting the objectives of your apprenticeship development. As mentioned earlier, workforce systems may present the greatest challenge in presenting an internally aligned voice in apprenticeship initiative leadership. It's not uncommon for the workforce system to present itself in leadership representing only one of the core programs of the system, while other core or required programs of that system are not included or engaged separately as another stakeholder that is not a part of the workforce system. A lack of internal alignment within the workforce system manifests as limited opportunities for inclusion by some populations that might tend to be served primarily by some of the programs not included in leadership, and perhaps limited access of certain expertise to businesses that could be more readily available to them if the workforce system was more aligned. For workforce systems wishing to address internal alignment more aggressively, we suggest the workforce system alignment tools and resources that we'll be talking a little bit more again later. So Lou, I'm going to kick this back to you.
Thank you, Doug. Well, after everybody's been in the room, all the drivers that are taking leadership role are in the room, and they've considered what the levers that are available, and they've looked at each of the key steps in their own internal processes, including for the workforce board. There are multiple entities within the workforce board, and they see how everything kind of flows within their system and looks where there's disconnects or areas of improvement, and they kind of identify where they're at, if it's at a communication level on this action, this key indicator of the process, or this step in the process, or if they identify it at another level and come to a consensus, yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and then have the conversation about, okay, where do we want to be? And then start getting into, okay, how are we going to get there? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in this slide. So commitment from the leadership drivers, planning for realistic change, getting the agreement and support of staff before implementation, and monitoring and impacting for sustained improvement. So with the commitment from the leadership drivers, the change is one of those things that's unlikely to happen unless the partnerships, each individual and each driver within that is committed to some kind of continuous improvement process. Planning and walking away is not an effective strategy. Secondly, changes must be made at the organizational and cultural level. This is a whole different system, so it has to kind of walk and talk like a different system rather than just being a fix here or a plug in there. It's a change in how business is being done, how the work is being done. Improvement to the key activities, when we're talking about where we're at and where we want to go, have to be realistic in terms of the resources that are available. Improvement is important both for increasing managers' knowledge, understanding, and confidence so that they can empower staff. Where possible, eliciting the help of internal champions within the drivers is in monitoring and impacting and sustaining improvement is wise. Piloting a proposed change is an effective way of introducing into new systems and processes. And on the planning for realistic change, I touched on it just now, but plan only for those improvements that are feasible within the anticipated timescale by focusing on key processes you want to change, bringing together a small group of committed people to work on them, undertaking initial research and being aware of the impact on people and processes within the organizations, because it's easy to set something up that inadvertently makes more work for someone else or is in conflict with some other activity. So it's important to talk to the people that are actually doing the work and involve them in it. Keeping things simple so that everyone can understand the change and no one feels threatened by it. Getting the support of all staff before implementing, we've talked about that. The best way to get support is not through buy-in, it's through involvement. So staff involved with implementing the change must have both the necessary skills to do their jobs and or be provided with staff development opportunities and coaching to gain those. On monitoring and impact and sustaining improvement, improvements to achievements and progression need monitoring. Need to ensure that change is taking place and it's being embedded in how people do their work. Piloting a proposal change, we talked about, is an effective way of introducing those ideas. It's important to have internal verifiers and assessors and work-based assessments should be knowledgeable and committed to the new concept. So if you have somebody that's doing the evaluation of the implementation or of the new approaches of the strategic plan, of the goals, of the steps to reach those goals, make sure that they understand what the goals are and what the measures are, and that they have their own skin in the game, that they want to see it be successful and not look for areas to find fault, but look for areas to improve. Next slide, Doug. So what to do, how to compensate when a spot at the table is vacant, how to compensate for a lead with a lever. If you don't have the lead at the table, could you use a lever? Using alignment strategies to compensate for missing resources. You know, it's inevitable that plans will have weak spots, no matter how much thought you put into them. And they'll surface, and oftentimes without a designated person or process to address them. In these cases, compensatory strategies can address some of these shortcomings. One of them is scaffolding. When an effort's not working within the current structure, a technique called scaffolding can shore up the structure. Just as in building a temporary scaffold to support construction or to reach a certain level, scaffolding consists of setting up a temporary team or borrowing staff expertise from one of the drivers or levers for a specific task and for a brief period of time. For example, if a necessary agency, a driver or lever is not at the table, bringing one of their staff in to simply explain their mission, their processes, their resources available for apprenticeships can compensate for having someone that's not at the table permanently. The second compensatory strategy is understanding fit, readiness, and timeliness to manage a gap. You have a gap in where you want to be and you're not getting there. Understand that drivers and levers can be at separate places when it comes to preparedness to move forward. And rather than trying to force movement, it's good to understand where the gaps in the path are, exploring it and seeking solutions, even if they're temporary ones. It may be necessary to take a step or two back without all of the drivers or levers, while some work to keep the progress going and the others can come up to speed a little bit later. You don't want to get too big of a gap, but sometimes you need to do that. It's also a suitable time to look at scaffolding or or level finding, which I'll talk about in a minute. So seeking to understand and looking at root causes with possible redesigning your plan are other ways to proceed. Next is the level finding. When you're stuck, when things aren't going as you'd like, level finding is a technique. So just as water seeks its own level, so sometimes do initiatives. And rather than pushing and failing at collaboration, for example, it may be a promising idea to proceed along at coordination together and letting the collaboration naturally resolve after you've done that. As one of my old bosses used to say about partnerships, you got to date before you get married. And sometimes that period of communication or coordination creates the trust and creates some momentum towards moving on to collaboration. Sometimes you have to move your goals back a little bit just so that you can be sure to reach them later on. And a final one is what they call tight, loose, tight. And that's to check to see if you are tight where you should be loose, or loose where you should be tight, or if you're just right on your tight and loose. And classic examples of that for a leadership team are to be really tight on the purpose and on the goals. So if it's in aligning apprenticeships, be really clear about what those goals are, why you're doing it, and tightly control those. On the other hand, you can be loose for execution. The teams working on process alignments and functions can have autonomy in how they implement and deliver on the goals, often under some resource constraints, of course, that are inherent in the system or imposed by the leadership team. So example might be, it's not necessary for the leadership team necessarily to come up with every recruitment idea to get more job seekers interested in apprenticeships or more businesses interested in apprenticeships. That's a good thing for a team to do, as long as they're staying really tight and consistent with the goals. And lastly, tight for results. The leadership cannot abandon the definitions and measures they expect to reach in terms of their goals and how to set what those monitoring factors are and what those markers along the way are. That's something that's responsibility of leadership. So staying tight on the goals, tight on the purpose, and tight on those measures allows for the right amount of supervision and oversight and planning, and at the same time leave some creativity for those that are more intimate to the work. So these compensating for weak spots, it's important to use resources and approaches at hand rather than getting overly fixated on seeking outside help or those outside of the system for a solution, or by relying on one person or one driver to do it for the system. The solution, the workaround, or the redesign is somewhere within those who are at the table. It just needs to be teased out. And Doug, I'll hand it back to you.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Lou. Now we'd like to quickly mention a few resources here that are directly related to our discussion in this three-part series on alignment, assessment, and planning. The first two items on this list are still in the final editing stage and will be posted soon by our Technical Assistance Center. The first is an overview, a guide on apprenticeship alignment. It's based on the guidance that we referred to before, and our review of the 2020 State Unified and Combined Plans. The second item is the assessment tool that we reviewed in last month's webinar. The third item, excuse me, the third item on this slide is entitled Aligning the Registered Apprenticeship and Workforce Development Systems. And this was developed by the American Institutes for Research for the Department of Labor. This is a focus largely for two of the system drivers, the apprenticeship offices and the workforce systems. But you will recognize how connections might be made with the business and education drivers along the way. For leadership teams that complete the assessment and identify levels of alignment that they might want to work toward, the activities outlined in the service alignment checklist beginning on page 16 of this resource are strong considerations for strategic planning to increase alignment. The fourth resource here is an internal service alignment assessment and planning process specifically designed for workforce systems by the Workforce Innovation and Technical Assistance Center, which operated from 2015 to 2020. Please contact us if you have questions about this resource and processes that it talks about. As we mentioned last month, our team would like to engage 3 state apprenticeship leadership teams to pilot the use of the alignment assessment process that we've been talking about in this 3-part series. And we'd like to share with you today visuals of how systems might be operating at different levels of alignment in different types of activities. This series of slides is an important part of the discussion for leadership team members, and it supports the ability of the team to come to a consensus on how drivers might align in certain areas. I won't review everything in the 5 desk aids that we'll be showing you, but we use these as examples to support your thoughts on driver alignment. And these really aren't definitions as much as they are examples. So as we think about outreach and engagement of potential apprentices, isolation is a pretty easy level of alignment to pick out. When the drivers are isolated, they will each approach potential candidates separately as representatives of their own program or business or institution or agency. If they're communicating, they will be likely to share promotional information that each driver is using. Once drivers operate at a coordination level, you'll note that there are regularly scheduled meetings, perhaps, for purposes of coordinating outreach efforts, updating professional staff of driver organizations, and the possibility of jointly developed outreach materials that identify driver organizations. At a collaboration level, you're likely to start seeing professionals of organizations in the different drivers beginning to work together in the engagement and support of apprentices, and recognizing an emphasis on co-enrollment as a deliberate strategy. With integration, the drivers develop and implement the outreach strategies together as an initiative, as opposed to an approach highlighting the separate programs involved and the different services each provides. As we think about the business outreach, support, and leadership, we realize that the business is itself one of the drivers. So some of this will likely to apply mostly with the non-business drivers, but business participation in this discussion is very informative and useful. At an isolated level, each of the non-business drivers and the internal components of those drivers will approach businesses separately and as customers, as opposed to leaders in the apprenticeship strategy. Drivers operating on a communication level will share information and resources that each provides so that it can be shared with businesses for possible referrals. When drivers coordinate, they may on a situational basis come together to meet a specific business need or engage others as leveraged partners in that process. On a collaboration level, you're more likely to start seeing the non-business drivers engage the business driver as a part of the leadership in an apprenticeship expansion initiative and meet regularly to develop strategies together. With integration, there's a shared initiative with objectives and activities to meet those objectives established together with roles for all of the drivers so that they can expand apprenticeship activity and meet success in a specific or multiple business sectors. You're probably starting to recognize a pattern here as we look at the different aspects of apprenticeship initiatives. One thing that a lot of you have probably already recognized is that, especially with apprenticeship, it's very possible for 2 of the 4 drivers to operate on a high level of alignment while the other 2 may be isolated or leveraged. For instance, the business and education drivers will usually, by definition already, be on a coordination level at a minimum for an apprenticeship even to exist. So consensus across the four is important if the objective is to operate as a system together in leadership. If the drivers are operating on a communication level, you're likely to see education drivers sharing information about apprenticeship-related programs with the other drivers for potential referrals for apprentices or for potential apprenticeship opportunities with businesses. As the system collaborates with regard to education related to apprenticeship, all the drivers are meeting together on a regular basis to enhance the related instruction. As we consider the registration of the apprenticeship programs and operational support on a communication level, there's likely to be more activity between the apprenticeship office and the sponsor or the business, with very general information about apprenticeship being shared with the other drivers. When information is passed on to the other drivers about specific registered apprenticeship programs for possible referrals, we're beginning to see activity at the coordination level. As drivers come together on a regular basis, possibly also with the governor's office or the state workforce development board, to strategically increase the number of registered apprenticeship programs, we're operating at a collaboration level. When it comes to state leadership and policy on a communication level, it is likely that there's a single driver in the leadership role for a particular initiative. And information about apprenticeship opportunities and funding is shared with workforce development boards and core and required programs. An example of operating at a coordination level is a state board establishing objectives in the state plan for apprenticeship expansion, along with roles identified for each of the drivers. The establishment of a committee to a state workforce development board that includes all four drivers and develops and implements a strategic plan to address state objectives is an example of collaboration or even integration. The purpose, again, the purpose of all five of these desk aids that we just reviewed is to provide possible examples to support your leadership team in your discussion and in defining your own alignment, and you will likely identify examples of your own that aren't included in these desk aids that will be unique to your own initiative, but still help you with developing your definition. We've mentioned our interest in engaging 3 state leadership teams to pilot the application of the alignment assessment process we've discussed here. With this pilot, our center will provide support to you in facilitating this process with your team. We'd be delighted to respond to any questions related to the alignment assessment process and related guidance shared during this webinar series. You can contact me directly at the email address on the final slide of this presentation. A part of our role as a technical assistance center is to support your team in evaluation of your system alignment and the development and implementation of strategies that will increase that alignment. Today, in our final session of our 3-part series on alignment and apprenticeship initiatives, we began with a brief discussion on leadership as it relates to driver roles in apprenticeship initiatives. We picked up where we left off in the second session on the alignment assessment process to outline a few of the so what questions that will support leadership teams in translating the assessment information into useful action. Of course, what is useful action is defined by the leadership team itself. This is where the importance of establishing the level of alignment the team itself envisions its greatest is to support its greatest effectiveness. That's identifying where we want to go. And then we wrapped up with available resources and how our Technical Assistance Center can support your apprenticeship leadership teams in addressing alignment. And with that, Lisa, we're back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug. And so we've answered a few questions over in the chat already about where you might be able to get the presentation as well as the recording of this. So everyone has that information there. Does anyone have any other questions right now for Doug or for Lou? And you can either come off mute or you can type it into the chat if you do. Give you a second. Okay. So if you still have one and you're going to start typing, go ahead. It's okay, you can do that. I do want to encourage folks to please reach out if you think that you would like to do this alignment with help, with a facilitator helping you, Doug and or Lou, maybe both even, and they will be able to help you talk about who should be at the table, how do you get them to the table, and just really help you go through this process. I can tell you as a former CEO of a workforce board, having a tool like this to help you align people is an amazing thing, because we always walk into the room thinking everybody's on the same page as us, right? And then suddenly you start to go through and you find out that maybe they don't have the capacity at the community college, or maybe the employers don't, you know, understand why they should even be involved in registered apprenticeship. So getting people together and having these conversations and using this tool can be a huge game changer for you to move registered apprenticeship forward in your area. This is free, you guys. We're not going to charge you for them to come and do this work. This is all because of the fact that we happen to have a grant that we are working on here from USDOL. So USDOL wants you to get this kind of assistance. So don't go, oh my gosh, I can't afford Doug and his team. You know, I can't do this. Yeah, you can. It's free. Okay. So Doug, if you'll take me to the next slide, we'll kind
Okay.
of get ourselves moving through. You might want to tell them what we've got here.
Thank you, Lisa. Once again, we'd like to share these guidance documents from the Department of Labor regarding implementation of apprenticeship programs. From a guidance standpoint, practitioners will grasp the Department of Labor's vision for alignment with a review of these documents. So again, now to share information about an opportunity for partnership with us to increase apprenticeship system alignment nationally. Lisa, we're coming back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to let you guys know, you've seen that there is like millions of dollars coming out in registered apprenticeship. That is not going to stop. There will be more grants, there will be more efforts, but here's one of the things that we're hearing already from our ETA folks that we're working with. They are concerned that even though all the dollars are going out there, that we're not getting better system alignment between our workforce system and employers and education to make registered apprenticeship really happen using some of these dollars. So just kind of know that the more that you can show, we've done our alignment in our area, we're ready to go, the better off you're going to be when those grants start to pop out again. And they will be coming out more, will definitely be coming. All right, so if you would like to pop to the next one, Doug, for me. We are definitely wanting you guys to participate with us. If you are doing something great in registered apprenticeship right now, we want to get you some national recognition on that. On almost every single one of our webinars that we do, we have at least one or two ETA folks who pop in. They don't always tell you they're ETA, they kind of hide. So we like that because they're listening in to see what's happening as well. We want your best practices. We want to be able to feature you guys on a webinar if you're doing something great. And if you're having challenges, we want to be able to help you. Again, no cost, expert technical assistance on this. We help you out. We're providing you with some information, some tools that you can use. And again, networking opportunities as well. So all of that comes through. Next slide, please. you actually participating and becoming a center partner. I know a lot of you have already heard this. A lot of you have already done the little QR code, because basically every time somebody fills out the form, I get a lovely little notification that someone has filled out another form. So use your phones. This is when it's acceptable. Grab that phone, use it, get your QR code going there, and become a center partner with us. Trust me, we're not asking you to do anything that's huge as a center partner. We just want to promote you guys, and we want to give you the technical assistance that we can give to you. All right, I think that takes us right to the end of our presentation. There you go. The information you were waiting for. Doug's information right there, as well as Lou's. Either one of them is more than willing to talk to you, answer some questions. And if you're one of the areas that wants to do this, we really want to do it as a state level. But if you're a local area that says, hey, I think I can get my state to help, join in on this and do this, please send a message to Doug so that we can get you as one of our 3 that we will pilot all of this alignment with and actually facilitate it with you. All right, we're letting you have 9 minutes back in your day. Not a normal thing, but I know everybody will enjoy that as well. So thank you very much for joining with us. Thank you for becoming a partner. And the biggest thanks to both Lou and Doug for having presented everything for us on these last 3 webinars here. Thank you guys. We appreciate it. And we will see you around again. Okay.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye. If you're applying to be a center partner, I'll just let you know that is not the way that you let us know that you want to be the pilot. You need to let Doug know that you want to be the pilot. Applying as a center partner just really lets me know that you're interested in hearing more, getting technical assistance on something, possibly some information on another webinar, that kind of thing. So please make sure that you send something to Doug specifically. All right. Thanks, folks. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.